Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rise Up with Nekima Levy Armstrong. I am so glad that it is Friday. It has been a very, very busy week. I'm expecting a busy weekend, but there's something about today being Friday that I think is truly exciting and gives me something to look forward to as we head into the weekend. I hope you guys are doing well out there. I am so excited about today's show. We have an incredible Black woman who is also an entrepreneur. She is known as the PR whisperer. She is an author as well, and she is just incredible in terms of doing what she does. I'm just so happy that she's able to join us today. Please join me in welcoming our guest, Jennifer R. Farmer. How are you doing today, Jennifer?
I'm doing great, Nekima. It's so good to be with you today.
Thank you. So tell everybody, where are you located?
So I'm joining you from the Columbus, Ohio area. I'm originally from Columbus. I lived in the DC area for about a decade, and I just came back home in August of 2020.
Wonderful. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey? How did you become known as the PR whisperer?
So, unlike many public relations professionals, I started my career in politics. So, when I was in Ohio, I went to school in upstate New York. When I came back to Ohio, I worked in the Ohio House of Representatives, the Ohio Senate, and I also worked for former Ohio Governor Ted Strickland. And when I was doing political work, I was always received compliments on my writing. So I had a boss who would say, "Oh, let Jennifer write it. You know, she's a good writer." And at that point in my career, I equated writing with communications. I now know that there are many, many different ways to communicate. But at that point, I said, okay, well, I'm a good writer. That must mean that I should go into communications and marketing. And I made the switch from politics to communications and marketing, starting with a faith-based organization. I did that for a while. And, the communications work, it just stuck. And so I have a phenomenal Black woman strategist, Gail Zugar, and I want to give a shout out to her wherever she is. But she and I were talking maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and she said, you're really like a PR whisperer. And I said, well, I hadn't thought about that. And so she said, yeah, you're like a PR whisperer. So I want to change your social media handles to PR whisperer. And I said, well, Gail, that makes a lot of sense. And that's exactly what we did. So my name, what people call me, it came from a Black woman.
That is really, really powerful. I love how you surround yourself with other powerful Black women who are making moves. One of those women I saw, your book, let me grab your book, First and Only, which we're going to be talking about today. A Black Woman's Guide to Thriving at Work and in Life. I noticed that not only is this essential reading for Black women as well as for allies, even for Black men, if you ask me. But the person who wrote your foreword is Nina Turner. And I know a lot of the people who are watching this broadcast are supporters of Nina Turner. Some are supporters of Bernie. Can you talk a little bit about and any words of advice may have given you as the PR whisperer?
You cut out a little bit. What was the last part that you said? Can I talk a little bit about
your connection with Nina Turner and any words of advice that she might have given you?
Yeah, so I initially met Nina Turner when I was working in the Ohio Senate. So I've worked in the Ohio Senate twice. Initially, I worked as a legislative aide, and then I came back maybe 7 years later, and I worked as the deputy chief of staff for the Senate Democratic Caucus. So that's when I first met Nina Turner. And in that capacity, my role was to really help corral the Senate Democrats. And this is Ohio, the Ohio Senate. And so that's how she and I met. She met me when I was doing political work. In fact, at that time, if someone would have said, "You will come to be known as the PR whisperer," I really would have laughed, because I was so knee deep in politics. So that's how she and I met. We've been very, very close ever since then, at different turns. She's been a client, but she has always been a friend. And a lot of what she and I talk about are the various challenges that Black women face, regardless of where you are in your career. I used to think when I was starting out that once you reach the pinnacle of your career, you wouldn't have troubles. It'd be easy sailing. And what I've learned is it doesn't matter how much you've accomplished. It doesn't matter where you've been, who you know. As a Black woman in America, it seems like you are always challenged. The potential for being challenged is always there. And so certainly those are conversations that we have. I have tried to be a supporter to her, an advisor, and she's done that for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so actually, when I was thinking about writing the book, and Nekima, I'm the kind of person that I don't like asking for anything, especially of my friends, because I know that they are bombarded with requests from a lot of people. So I remember when I went to her to ask her to write the foreword, I really didn't want to. And I kind of beat around the bush. Well, if you think about it, what do you think? And I did all this, all this dancing around the subject. And when I finally got it out, she said, absolutely. She was like, you could have just said, this is what I need to do. But that's the kind of relationship that we have.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really inspiring to see the trajectory that you've been on in terms of working in the political arena, and then a Black woman, coming alongside and giving you some words of advice that really helped open you up to new possibilities. And we all benefit from your work in a variety of ways, even from some of the clients that you represent who are able to appear on national television networks or to have their voices be heard. A lot of that has to do with your work. So can you talk a little bit about being a Black woman in corporate America, in the workplace, and how did you come to the realization that we are often treated differently in comparison to our male counterparts and in comparison to our white counterparts?
So, the first thing is, for me, when I make a calculation about who I want to work with, I'm very much drawn to people and organizations who are committed to racial and social justice. And I think that that sense of advocacy, it's been in my DNA. It was something that my parents, grandparents, and foreparents, that was in their DNA. So that very much resonates with me. And I realized that as one person, there's only so much that I can do. However, I can maximize my impact and reach by helping to tell stories that would otherwise go unnoticed. So I'm very, very motivated by doing that. I think that throughout my career, I would come across these situations where I would be new to an environment and I would make these calculations, everything from how do I style my hair? What do I wear? What does what I wear and how I style my hair, even how I present myself, how will that impact whether or not I'm able to advance? Do I need to be one of the boys? Do I need to be one of the guys? Or can I be my authentic self? And I remember I would ask people when I would start new positions, how do you want me to give you feedback? Or, and I was basically trying to figure out whether or not it was a safe environment and how to navigate that environment. For a long time, I wouldn't talk about what I did because I felt a sense of, I felt like people would not understand, that my family wouldn't understand. So I kept a lot of it to myself. Over time, I came to realize that there were Black women in a host of different positions who were navigating similar things. And I realized that there's a loneliness that comes when you are taking a stand that no one else has taken, when you think differently from other people, when you feel like you're drawn to something, but the people around you are not drawn to that. There is a loneliness that can accompany you being yourself, you living into your full self, you showing up in all of your glory and all of your beauty, you taking a stand. And I realized that the Black women who I knew and the Black women who I saw who dared to be courageous, who dared to have the audacity to ask for what they wanted, to put forth a politic that might be different from what other people might feel comfortable with, those women were savagely attacked time and time again. And so for me, when I started writing the book, I realized this has not only been Jennifer's experience, but this has been the experience of Black women who dare to show up in a way that is authentic and true to them.
That's really powerful. People like Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, and Shirley Chisholm came to mind while you were talking about the pathways that Black women have to navigate in a society and an environment that's often hostile to who we are, our ideas, and the fact that we have the nerve to show up as fabulous Black women, as outspoken Black women in some of these hostile spaces.
Yeah, and what I learned, Nekima, is when I was coming up, I learned that it was safe to be a people pleaser. It was safe to make the other people around you comfortable, to keep them happy, to keep them comfortable. And when I started my career, that was my modus operandi. Like, how do I make sure the people around me don't feel threatened by me? And so for years, I've been writing for years, but for years I would write and I would give it to other people to put their name on it. And it's only in the past, I would say 5 years, that I've said, no, I wrote this, my name goes on it. But we think about people like Shirley Chisholm, and these people are celebrated today. But in the moment when they were leading and working, they were not celebrated. And so I tell the people who I work with who are daring to do something different, who are being courageous and bringing forth, I tell them to persevere, because you can't judge yourself based solely on what your contemporaries say about you, given the context of the moment that we're living in now. Some things are like wine. They get better with time, or people appreciate them more with time. And that's a conversation that I have quite a bit with a number of dynamic Black women who I work with.
Do the Black women that you work with, generally speaking, do they feel valued and appreciated in the workplace?
Many of them don't.
Can you talk a little bit about why?
Yeah, when I was writing my book, one of the people who I interviewed was Hannah Drake. And Hannah Drake is an author. She's a poet. She's an activist. And just a phenomenal Black woman. And she wrote a poem about the expectations placed on Black women. And I was asking her, how did you muster the courage to leave the unsafe working environment that you were in? And she didn't feel appreciated. And what it took for her, and I quote this in the book, is, she took something to a colleague and told them, this is what our boss has asked for us to do. The person hit her with an envelope and told her to basically get lost. When she went to their boss to tell him what happened, he threatened to suspend her. And so she is but one example. But one thing that she shared with me when we were talking is that when you have the courage to walk into your purpose, you free other people to do the same. But Hannah was one person. Most of the Black women who I interviewed for the book said, this is right on time. I've been dealing with this stuff for years, or I'm constantly in spaces where I am the only one and they don't want my voice. I can say something and they will ignore it. And then if a white man or a white woman or even a Black man says it, they will jump all on it and I won't even get credit. I have heard that scenario over and over and over again. And what is surprising is even in organizations that pride themselves on doing well, that pride themselves on being concerned with justice, if they are not intentionally working on it, they will still undervalue Black women, not pay them what they should be paid, want them to be the strong Black woman, don't get me started on that, or put more on them than is feasible for one person.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the pay gaps that Black women experience. I noticed in the book, you talked about, a Black woman earning X amount by this time when the white man earned that amount last year. Can you talk a little bit about Black women's pay in the workplace?
Yeah, so a lot of times we are underpaid. We are asked to do things for which we don't have resources. And many of us, we want to do a good job. You know, it's not just that we are interested in the work that we're doing, but we take a great deal of pride on doing a good job. And a lot of times we are, you know, we're underpaid. And here's the rub, I should say, is even when you go about the process of asking for what you deserve, there's a politics and sometimes there's a cost associated with that. And so, you know, when you look at and you read books like Lean In and other books that say, oh, well, you need to do this and you need to do that. What I tell Black women is that every bit of leadership advice that we receive, it has to be viewed from the lens of gender and race. Because while it is correct that you should feel comfortable asking for, you know, for more money, asking for what you deserve, you could be penalized for having the audacity to even do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this, you know, I always think about this in the context of self-employment. And, you know, when I'm negotiating contracts with different people, and when I hear about what some of my contemporaries who are not Black women, you know, what they make, I mean, it comes up over and over and over and over again. And this issue of the pay gap, it's not about Black women being less competent. It's not even about us not always asking. It's about a system that is unjust and a system that is designed to devalue us and to devalue our accomplishments.
Mm-hmm. Not to offend anyone else, but sometimes we're the most competent in an environment and we're
Yeah.
the lowest ranked and
Yeah.
receiving the lowest pay, but we have the most on our plates
Yeah.
in the workplace and at home.
Yeah, definitely. Getting back to Hannah for a second, she had this phenomenal analogy. She and her friends, they would say, be like Bob. And I would say, what's Bob? And she would say, Bob is the mediocre white guy who really thinks that he is the most amazing thing since sliced bread. And so we kind of laughed about that because many of us don't know what it's like to be like Bob. Many of us, we come in and we work hard and it's expected of us. And it's like we can never sit back and breathe. There's always one more thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A lot of what you're talking about now, what you shared in the book, really resonated with me. Being in my 20s and starting to teach law in a predominantly white male dominated and conservative environment, and wondering, am I enough? Am I
Yeah.
capable of doing this? Why am I, the first and the only? Like all those thoughts swirled through my mind. And I remember feeling like I had to dress like I was older,
Yes.
because I didn't want to face discrimination because most of my colleagues were 40 plus. Some of my students were my age. So I literally, went out and bought these suits to make myself look older. I wore my hair like I was older. And I spent all these years trying to find out, okay, now who am I? Right? Who's the core of who I am? And how does that translate to every environment? And how do I show up as the real me? And it took me a few years to
Yes.
really feel comfortable showing up as the real me.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And by the time we make it to work to do the actual job, we've already cleared so many different hurdles, and I say that when we're hired, we're doing the work for which we were hired. Sometimes we're doing 2 and 3 jobs and being paid for one. But then there's the emotional labor and just the emotional gymnastics that we have to do in order to just show up over and over and over again. And some of those emotional gymnastics are things that you just mentioned, the considerations. Do I need to put a happy face at the end of this email? Do I need to say cheers? How much time do I need to spend before the meeting, asking about people's dogs and what they did for vacation? It's all this stuff that we have to do in addition to the job at hand.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that for many of us as Black women, even though we know we live in a racist society, we live in a society, unfortunately, that's been undergirded by white supremacy, I think we still can have different expectations going into a workplace where, let's say, people have college degrees or advanced degrees, thinking that there's going to be less ignorance than, something we might encounter out in the streets. But I found that there's sometimes even more ignorance in those spaces because people's perspectives about Black people and Black women have not ever been challenged. And they often have not been educated. For all the degrees that people have, they haven't learned about our history, nor having an understanding of who we are as Black women and who we've had to be historically. So it's a culture shock, you know, a lot of times for us going into these spaces.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the key tips that you would have for Black women who are the first and only going into these white spaces. As one of my friends, Patrice Jackson, she wrote a book called White Spaces, White Places, you know, something along those lines, to try to identify the scope of like where we are and what we're dealing with in these environments. So what are your tips for the Black women who are listening?
Okay, so the first thing that I'll say is that the system has to change. Anything that I offer in the way of a tip, it's to support you when you're in these environments. But until the system fundamentally changes, until the workplaces have decided to be anti-racist, anti-sexist, and to do their own work, there will always be challenges. So what I offer is, okay, how do you take care of yourself as best as possible, understanding that some of this is not our work to do. You know, so this book, my book, is not meant to say, all right, you do all these things and everything is going to go well. My book, what I'm saying is, as you're fighting for your liberation, as you're moving important work, here's a reminder to take care of yourself. And here is a reminder, or here are some little tidbits to help you along the journey. It's almost like if you've ever run a marathon or a long distance race. When you set out to run that race, you can't just go in your tennis shoes and your favorite outfit. You have to have snacks and fuel in your backpack. You have to have water. You have to have the things that are going to help you get from point A to point B. And that is how I like to think of my book. So one of the things that I recommend in the book is that, we are intentional about creating a village that understands what we're going through. And when you create that village and you maintain that village, the other thing that I say is you have to be willing to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is very, very tricky because for decades, Black women have been taught, we've been primed to be strong. And part of being strong is not showing weakness. Part of being strong is, even if you're hurting, my aunt would say, you better not let a tear come out. If they hurt your feelings, they better not know it. You better suck it up. That's what my aunt used to tell me. And she would say, you go in there and you do what the boys do. And if they hurt you, you just keep going. Well, I understand the lens from which she offered that advice, but sometimes we don't need to be strong. Sometimes we need to go to a safe space and say, you know what? I'm hurting, or I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to navigate, or I need help with this project, or I don't know who to turn to. I need a mentor. And so I talk about the importance of not only vulnerability, but assessing where you can be vulnerable. And that way your vulnerability will not be used against you. And Nekima, for all that you do and for the many hats that you wear, you are a beautiful person, and you're someone who I feel can give that. So I remember reaching out to you and us talking, and you giving me some tips, things that maybe I needed to hear again. And so that's what I mean. It's like we have to have the courage to go to someone and say, well, how do you do this, sis? Or can you help me with that? So vulnerability is critically important. It's also to understand it. It's also important to understand what is yours and what is not yours. And a lot of these workplaces, we are accused of so much, and some of that is not ours to carry. So when you get clear about, okay, well, what work do I need to do? And then what is this person's issue? That will help you to have a proper perspective. For years, I would internalize the feedback that I got, the negative feedback. And I said, okay, well, maybe there's just something wrong with me. Maybe I just wasn't cut out. And that was not the case at all. It's just that the place where I was, it was not in alignment. It was not a good fit for me. It was bringing out the worst things, and it was aggravating other things. So I say to people to understand what's yours to carry and what's not. Mm-hmm. I also recommend to Black women that, we really get in touch with our inner child. And when I say get in touch with our inner child, Iyanla Van Zant says that you have to know yourself through and through. And I really, really believe that. And part of knowing yourself is knowing not just where you come from in terms of community or in terms of your family, but understanding why you do what you do. Even as a 40-something-year-old woman, understanding, why you do what you do and what's animating those decisions. And so I talk a lot about this notion of people pleasing. And I had to ask myself, well, where did that come from? And then I was able to trace back in my childhood where it came from. And armed with that information, I was able to evaluate, or to give myself permission to evaluate, is this what you want to do? You don't have to do it just because someone asked you to do it. And what is your motivation for saying yes? How do you benefit from saying yes? And how are you losing? So I can go on, but I think I'll pause there and throw it back to you. And then, if you want me to add on, I will.
Yeah, I think that those are some powerful tips to think about. And I like how you framed it in the context of reminding people you're operating inside of a system, right? So this may or may not lead you to a certain place, in that environment, but it might lead you to liberation in the sense of saying, this is not a good fit for me. Like you said, it's not in alignment. Maybe I need to hang out my own shingle. Maybe I need to find other Black women who want to take our intellectual property, the power that we have, and launch our own, multi-million-dollar business.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that it's important, like you're doing, giving women permission to explore those other options instead of feeling boxed in. Right.
And, I'm an observer of people. And I pay attention to how different communities, how they hold responsibility, what they do with it. And I was thinking, okay, well, when you say yes, it has to always be yes. So you can never say this doesn't work for me. You just drive yourself into the ground doing it. And one of the folks who I interviewed for the book was Malkia Cyril. Just beautiful, smart, amazing, dynamic. And Mac is from the Bay Area. And when I was talking to Mac about, how Black women show up and how we hold work, one thing that she said to me is that we have been taught to labor at any and at every expense, even if it is our own expense. And so in the book, I say, well, we have to be willing to do Black womanhood differently. And one of the things I meant is if you can't do it, or if doing it will be detrimental to you over the long term, perhaps you don't do it. And that it is okay to say, you know what, this is not for me, or you know what, I miscalculated. I'm actually not able to do that, and to be okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's a hard part for us, to become okay with that, because we literally are taught that we have to take on the world with or without support. And so many of us go out with that mindset, and we wind up burning out.
Yeah.
Often at a young age, or wanting to leave, our professions altogether after years of being beaten down in the workplace.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes I think, I just want to spend a day where I do nothing. And I tell myself, my retirement job, you know what my retirement job is going to be?
What?
I'm just going to walk dogs. That's wow. I'm not going to have anything that I have to, that's too intensive. I'm going to get a bunch of dogs. I may be a dog trainer, but that's on the other side.
Right.
Yeah, that's on the other side.
I think it's good to even just cast that vision, to say that it's okay to wake up and say, I'm not going to do anything today.
Yes.
I'm going to take the day off. I'm going to go to the spa. I'm going to go relax. I'm going to go. That's okay for us to do that as Black women. Earlier, you were talking about the importance of vulnerability.
Yes.
I think that is a challenging place for many of us as Black women, because there have been so many consequences and repercussions when we are vulnerable. It is seen as a sign of weakness. Some people capitalize off of that as well in the workplace. But I notice a difference between when we are crying versus what's known as white women tears.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of
yeah.
what you've seen in the workplace regarding that?
Oh, it really pisses me off. I mean, it really makes me angry because society is primed to expect us to do more, to keep going, and to really disregard our emotions and how we feel. And so I also think that white women can weaponize, we can be crying and saying, oh, I can't. And then someone will say, oh, come on, you can, you're strong. Or, suck it up, stop whining, just keep going. And a white woman will start crying, and then the environment will say, oh, well, it's too much for her, we pushed her too fast, we didn't give her the supports. And it's not deemed as a bad thing, for most white women. In fact, it's a way to escape accountability. So that really, really irritates me. And even though there are risks associated with being vulnerable, I still think that we have to do it, because how does it benefit me if I pretend to hold it all together, to have it all together, and then die at an early age? Or I have a nervous breakdown. And, when you have a nervous breakdown, it interrupts everything. And so what good does that do me versus saying to someone, I'm struggling, or I just can't today? It's better. And who cares what they think? Who cares? And so even in the workplace, what I tell people is, when you enter a new job, look for potential allies, look for people who could be an ally, and then investigate and take time and assess whether or not that feeling that you had, whether or not it's true. Because sometimes we can, put our trust in the wrong person. And then when you have an ally, allow them to help you, throw away some of the pride and say, well, this is what I need. And it's really interesting to me how women from different cultures, how they handle vulnerability and what they need, and also the expectations that they place on themselves. And this has come to me over and over again. But I was talking to a girlfriend of mine who's white, and I was just going through a hard time, and I had all kinds of things going on. And when I mentioned two of those things, she said, whoa. And she said, and I didn't know this, and I'm not going to reveal her name, but she said, look, I've been on Prozac for years. And any one of those things that you just mentioned would have put me on medication. And I think that you are too hard on yourself, and you're asking too much of yourself. So what that taught me is how we think about responsibility and how we think about what's normal. It's not always helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I know that was a lot.
No, that was right on point, because okay. I know that there's Black women watching this broadcast. There's Black men. There's white allies as well who are watching and who need to hear this.
Yeah. And sometimes I say, I might, and I don't do this often, I probably need to do it more, but I'll wake up and say, on the weekend, I'll say, I'm not doing anything today. I'm not even going to, I'm not going to brush my hair. I'm not doing anything. Mm-hmm. And then there's a minute where there's like a sense of self-judgment. It's like, no, it is what it is. And if you happen to run into me at the grocery store on one of those days, so what? Mm-hmm. And so I say, I'm going to try to be as comfortable as possible in my skin, and do what helps me feel better, for the moment.
Mm-hmm. What would you recommend for those who consider themselves to be allies and who want to support Black women in the workplace? And I'm saying this as someone who, of course, I am a Black woman. I have worked in environments that were predominantly white for quite a number of years. I have seen real allies who have tried to mentor me or put in a good word for me. And I've seen people who have been fake allies who, the moment they'll support you until something, let's say, controversial happens, or if you fall out of someone's grace, suddenly, you're wondering, is this really an ally? Is this really somebody who has my back after what I've seen? So I try to teach people how to become true allies, particularly of Black women. I know the experience I faced when I ran for office, how it helped me see the landscape very differently between those who talk the talk and those who walk the talk, as far as true allyship and going to bat as a Black woman.
Well, I recommend that you don't assume. So you've heard me talk about what's helpful for me, but that does not mean that is helpful for other Black women when it comes to being an ally. And so what I recommend is, if you're working with someone and you want to support them, go to them and ask them, how can I support you? Right. And tell them your intention. You don't have to say, I want to be an ally. You can just say, I want to support you and I want to help in any way that I can. Is there anything that I can do? And make that offer. And then when they come to you and they say, well, this is what I need, be ready to show up. The other thing is, don't look for a pat on the back or a reward, at least not immediately, because sometimes when people are in a situation of crisis, it may take them a while before they come back and say, oh, Nekima was really there for me during this period. They may not have the capacity in that moment. And if you're looking for it, you have to question your motivation. If getting a pat on the back is your chief motivation, don't do it, And then the other thing that I tell people is that most of us, we want to be seen. We want to be seen in all of our humanity. When George Floyd, and I know you've done a lot of organizing work in the community before George Floyd was killed, but even after, but by the time George Floyd was killed, I was like in a deep depression and I was just trying to make it from day to day. I was just tired and I just felt like, there's no hope. And I remember I had several women who, I don't know if I would have considered them allies at that point. They were just women who I worked with, reached out to me. And one of them said, Jennifer, I don't know what to say, but I want you to know that I'm thinking about you and I see you. For me, that feeling of being seen by people who don't walk the path that I'm on and people who are on my path, that meant something for me. By the time I got the fourth email or the fourth text message, I had one woman said, and she was a small business owner, and she said, listen, I'm sorry, I don't know what to say. I want to help. Can I do anything for your business for free, gratis? You don't even have to pay me. And I did not give her anything for free because I believe that work has value and dignity. But the fact that as a small business owner, she made that offer, that meant something to me. Mm-hmm. So I think that, committing to see, committing to act, committing to speak up for that person, even in uncomfortable times when they're being attacked. It's really easy to be my friend when I'm on top of the world. But when no one wants to speak to me, when the trolls have gotten to my Twitter page, are you there at that point? Mm-hmm. That's important. And then don't broadcast it. Don't say, well, Nekima needed this, and so I went and did that for her, and now I'm on my way to help Jennifer. Don't do that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that these are fantastic tips. And I was looking at some of the comments come in as you were speaking, and one woman was talking about allyship. She a queen is Facebook had that. She also talked about the fact that sometimes people will support you until you do more than they think that you should, right? That could be a new position that you are going up for that they think they are qualified for, or maybe another white person. And I encountered something similar when I ran for office, where I had some white folks who would support me as long as I was an attorney and activist. But once I ran for an elected position, it felt as if these so-called allies, not all of them, but quite a few of them, became threatened and were willing to support a white man who sounded a lot like me, but had nothing to back up, what he was saying. And that was really surprising. I'm like, so allyship only goes so far for certain people.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you're going to be a good ally, the best thing that you can do is to do your own work. You cannot help me and you cannot stand with me if you have not tackled, the homophobia that you have within you, the racism that you have with you, the sexism. I'm not saying you have to be perfect, but you have to be committed to doing your own work. And there's so much anti-Blackness. One of the things that is so hurtful to me is I feel like Black people can be among the most loving, the most forgiving, the most patient. And I feel like we will welcome people in. And so there have been times that I've stood in solidarity with different communities, and it's always hurtful to see the level of anti-Blackness that many non-Black people have. And so what I say is, if you want to be an ally, start with yourself. Do your work. Again, perfection is not the goal. Like, you don't have to be perfect to help, But if you have not done your own work, you will have situations where people say, well, I can only support you so far. But once you rise above the box that I have for you, then I have to pull back. You know, those kind of things happen when you're not doing your own work, when you're not honest, and when you don't have a practice of self-reflection.
Absolutely. And I think very important advice for white allies to pay attention to, because we're out here in a state that is 84% white. We have dealt with so many injustices time and time again, and we see that allies are few and far between. Or we'll have a situation where you might have white allies who show up at a march, but when it comes to treating Black women with dignity in the workplace, that's absent. So I just feel that it's not realistic for you to call yourself an ally if you're not practicing that and going back to people in the workplace.
Yeah, definitely.
So I know that we just have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that people know how to find you if they're interested in following your work, and also how to buy your book. Our producer, Josh, is going to post the link. I want Black women to get this book. It's very, very powerful. My daughter asked me, one of my daughters is 21. She's like, Mom, can I please read that book when you're finished? So it's going to be very eye-opening for her when she reads it as well. I want allies to get this book to learn about what we go through as Black women, but also how to show up as a better ally in support of Black women in the workplace. We need champions. We don't need fair weather friends. We don't need fake progressives. We don't need fake allies. We need champions for us as Black women.
Definitely. Definitely. So to find me on Twitter and Instagram, I'm at PR_whisperer, and PR stands for public relations. So at PR_whisperer. My website is jenniferrfarmer.org. And you got to put that R in there because I compete with someone who has a similar name. She's a psychic. I'm not. So make sure you put the R, jenniferrfarmer.org. And first and only a Black woman's guide to thriving at work and in life. You can find it with my publisher, Broadleaf Books. And I know that Josh has the link in the chat feature. You can really find it anywhere where books are sold. If you just Google first and only a Black woman's guide to thriving at work and in life, you will find it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for all of your amazing work. I mean, I'm just in awe of who you are and what you do, and just your confidence level, right? As a Black woman going into this field, knowing when I set out to do something, I'm going to deliver, right? And I just think that that's an inspiring witness, and also that you love it enough to write this guide for us that I believe will lead us to success and liberation, which is vitally important. So thank you so much for joining me on Rise Up today. I appreciate you and everything that you brought to the table, all of your wisdom.
Thank you so much. And I'm sending all that love.
Thank you all for